for that and have adequate disclosure in order properly to defend themselves.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Now, next on my list is Mr. Riley Smith, but I think maybe you don't actually want to make oral submissions, is that right?
I'm in the same position as Mr. Hammond. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, but I have nothing for written submissions.
Right, thank you very much. That's splendid. All right, thank you. So we now get to Mr. Walsh, who's here for the LFEPA. Yes, Mr. Walsh.
Good morning, sir. Stephen Walsh. I represent the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, the LFEPA, which runs the LFB, together today with Sarah Lefebvre. Sir, you, I know, have now read our written submissions and understand them, and all other core participants have seen them, so I have no intention of repeating them today. What I now have to say focuses on the submissions of other core participants, many of whom have expanded on them yesterday. And in short, the LFEPA agrees with certain of the views expressed by those representing the bereaved, the survivors and residents who lived in the vicinity, on the question whether Phase 1 can realistically be restricted to the factual narrative only of the 14th of June, to the exclusion of what many have called the why questions or the qualitative questions. And so while we accept entirely and understand, given the enormous task which the inquiry faces, your pragmatic reasons for proposing a limited-natured Phase 1, we do feel strongly that there are good reasons for giving more flexibility, and perhaps very considerable flexibility, to Phase 1, so as to allow a consideration of the reasons why the LFEPA personnel carried out their fire and rescue operation during the fire in the way in which they did, the application of high-rise fire and rescue policies, many of which have national application, and how they were applied on the night, and obviously the enormous challenges which the emergency services faced in the course of this unprecedented fire. Some of the reasons for adopting a much more flexible approach at Phase 1 have already been touched on by the lawyers for the bereaved and the survivors and residents. But from the LFEPA's point of view, they include, first of all, a strong belief that the bereaved and survivors are entitled to gain an understanding of how and why the fire rescue operation was conducted as it was, as soon as reasonably practicable. And that's the paramount reason. But there are other reasons. The second is that firefighters and others who give evidence should, in fairness to them, have an opportunity of explaining not only what they did, but the reasons why they did it. That, in part, would avoid, where possible, not always possible, we accept, the need for witnesses, many of whom continue to be profoundly traumatized by their experiences, to give evidence on more than one occasion, which I know is an aim that everybody wishes to achieve if that is possible. But it goes beyond that, because if what might be regarded as obvious why questions, the elephant in the room, which one of the lawyers yesterday touched upon, are not to be recognised and not to be asked at Phase 1, the answers to them will inevitably be left hanging in the air, debated in the public arena, possibly for several months pending Phase 2. And the problem with that is that there is a real risk that public confidence in high-rise fire and rescue operations will be unnecessarily affected, possibly through misunderstandings, when clarity is capable of being achieved on certain issues by addressing quantitative evidence, the why questions, at a relatively early stage. And it goes without saying that the extraction of fire safety critical learning and any need to change policy obviously should be done as soon as possible. And it occurred to me actually yesterday that the risk identified by Mr. Westgate, that expert reports at phase 1 may carry something of a lower status than those at phase 2, by reason of the fact that phase 2 reports will address qualitative issues, will be substantially ameliorated. It's not a major issue, but it is another concern. And so I say that because, frankly speaking, the LFEPA at one stage believed that a full understanding of what went wrong with the structure of the building, which we say must have been the case, so as to create such an unprecedented fire, was necessary in order fully to appreciate the way in which the fire service conducted its fire and rescue operation. That remains true, but the LFEPA now feels that the inquiry can properly proceed at phase 1 on the basis that a great many questions will obviously need to be left until phase 2, but questions which can be addressed at phase 1 without prejudicing the police investigation, which is obviously of paramount importance, should be answered as soon as possible, which is, in short, are the reasons why we urge upon you, sir, a very flexible, potentially very flexible approach to phase 1. Whether one calls it phase 1 or phase 2, those are our submissions on that issue. There are only 2 or 3 other brief matters that I want to touch upon. First of all, disclosure. Lest there be any doubt, and so as to be entirely clear, the LFEPA is and always has been, not only in this inquiry but in other instances, fully candid and frank and open in its duty to carry out proper disclosure. And certainly in relation to this inquiry, I hope that we have discharged that duty fully. I know that you are to hear from the Fire Brigade Union shortly, and I simply want to support the Fire Brigade Union suggestion, and indeed that of others yesterday, that the inquiry really would benefit from the assistance of a suitable expert in the application of the Housing Act 2004, particularly Part 1 of that statute. Whether it's a housing officer or an environmental health expert, the LFEPA have no particular comment, but great benefit can be derived from that. Position statements, which I know say you've been asking everybody about this morning. The LFE's basic position is that we can see the merit in the production of written clarification of the LFEPA's position, if only because it might properly reflect what will, in any event, be contained in an opening statement in due course, which all core participants, of course, have a right to make. However, such written clarification as might be provided, whether in a position statement or another document, can really only properly be made at a point when core participants are cited on a significant element of the disclosure which the inquiry will be having to look at. In short, it can only be as good as the disclosure on which it is based, and if any precedent or authority is required for that assertion, the same question was addressed in the renewed Hillsborough inquests, and the coroner, former Lord Justice Goldring, took that view. In other words, that we should be further down the line with more substantial disclosure before position statements are appropriate. But that is not to say that the LFEPA doesn't want to do it, because we're very anxious to do it and get on with it as soon as possible. Remembering that it is the Metropolitan Police who are responsible for taking statements, and that includes all statements from firefighters and LFEPA personnel, the vast majority of which are obviously yet to be disclosed. And on that topic, finally, we would expect the LFEPA to provide its written opening statement to the inquiry for appropriate disclosure well in advance of the hearing of live evidence. And then finally, since so you've been addressing the question of a potential consultative panel, the LFEPA certainly has no objection to that course and can well see why such an approach could be very beneficial for many reasons. So those are the short submissions that I make. I don't know if there's anything else.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.